We're gonna ring you.
Yeah. Okay, Dad, why don't you just, okay, today is September 3rd, 2005, and this is Louislianez, patriarch of the Lianez family. Dad, why don't you tell us about your family, your mom and dad, and as much as you remember about growing up.
Well, let's see. I was born in 1924 in Paulding, Ohio, and my father was Genaro Louislianez, and my mother was Vicenta Orozco Louislianez. They were married here in Paulding, and they were people, survivors from the Revolution of 1916 during Pancho Villa's, during the Revolution in Mexico in 1916. My mother and dad escaped from the revolutionists, and they came to Texas, and from Texas they moved to Michigan, and from Michigan they moved to Ohio, called Little Mexico, which they were all beet workers, and we had a great big plant. It was a sugar mill plant where they blocked beets, picked tomatoes, but we lived in Little Mexico because it was next to the sugar beet factory. That was in 1924. And let's see.
Was that in Paulding too?
That was in Paulding, Ohio. And we lived there for quite a while. Then from there we moved to Michigan. And from Michigan we moved back to Ohio in Paulding. And from Paulding we moved to Ohio, which I met a baseball player, Ned Garber. And he was famous at that time. He played for the Detroit Tigers. I went to school, and the first couple of days I didn't know how to speak English, so they sent me home. And where the place we lived was a German woman. We lived on their farm, and she found out why they sent me home, and she taught me English. I would go there in the evenings, and she would hold up an object, a spoon. She would say spoon, I would say spoon. And that's the way I learned English. The next year, I did start the school. That's how I learned English, by this German farm lady. And from there, let's see, from there we moved to Vanerdosha, and I went to York Schoolhouse, and from Vanerdosha we moved to Hogan Jackson, and from Hogan Jackson, that's where I met my wife Tonya. We met there at the high school. We was the only 3 Mexicans there in that high school. It was myself, my Tonya, and my sister Salsa. And that's, so far that's it. Then from there on, my dad caught asthma, and I didn't go to school for a couple of weeks there, and the troubadour officer, his name was Schaefer. He came to the house to find out why I didn't go to school, and I took him in the bedroom where my dad was. He had asthma, and I got a hardship leave from school, and I only went to the 5th grade, but my sister kept going. And after that, a couple of years later, we made our promise that we was going to get married, and me and my wife got married, and from there on, our children was born. First, it was Manuel, which he made a Navy career, and he had it 30 years in, and retired as a Master Chief. Then we had David, and he became a teacher the hard way. He did everything the hard way. He almost, what would you call, educated himself by working in the kitchens at the college. But he did it, he made it, and he became a good teacher, as nowadays. And then there was my daughter Judy, and she's doing pretty good, not bad. She was there for a while. She was a supervisor of a plant, but right now she's looking for a job because the plant moved out. And next, let's see, it was John. And John is working for a company here in Van Wert, and he's doing good. He put his time in the Navy, and he got discharged, and so far he's doing pretty good. He's standing on two his feet. And next was Tom. Tom was our youngest, and he also did it the hard way, going to college, and he's doing very good. He's educated himself, and I'm very proud of my kids because they're doing good. They're good citizens, and that's about it.
Dad, how about our last name? How did we end up with Lioness? That
Oh.
isn't what we originally started with, was it?
No, our last name was Yanez, but the teacher, because the Y in Spanish looks like a double L, and she couldn't figure it out, so she says, I don't know how this word here, and I told her it's Yanez, but she put an L in it, and that's how we became the Lioness family. We are the first Lioness family, and according to history, of my whole family, and when I went to Columbus for my birth certificate, so I could get my Social Security, I found out that my name, it wasn't Louis, it was Juan Louislianez. So they asked me, what do you like to be known as? I says, I like to be known as Louislianez because all my papers, my military papers, my discharge papers, and everything that I own was the name of Linus. So they changed it to Linus, and that's how we became the Linus family.
Now you've got a sister and a stepsister?
Oh yeah, had a stepsister here, and her name was Juanita Barrientos, and she had a very, very large family. And so far, as I heard, they're doing very good. She had 9 children, and we had one hero. His name's Bob Barrientos. He's got medals from France, medals from the United States, and he passed away. He's buried out here in one of the cemeteries next to his mother.
Okay, now she's your stepsister on your mother's side or your
Yeah,
father's
she's my
side?
stepsister on my mother's side.
Okay, and how about your sister?
My little sister.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she was born about 3 years later than I was, and she's doing very good.
Okay.
She has 9 kids too.
Okay, her name?
Is Salsa Gonzalez, and her children are very, very good. We had a reunion here in Van Wert, and it's almost close to. I think it was 90 people that was there. This year we're going to have another reunion in 2006, and I'm counting on more because I'm trying to get all the families together so they'll know each other, that wherever they go in the United States, they got some kind of relation in that state. How's that?
That's good. Dad, how long has the family been here in Van Wert, and how long have we been on Vine Street?
Well, after I got from discharge, I told my wife to come back to Van Wert because she was living in Gary, Indiana, and Gary, Indiana was getting to be a very dangerous place to live. So they moved here to Ohio City, and after I came back, I got a job at Connell Can Company, and so we moved here to Van Wert, and that was in 1948. We lived in South Franklin for 2 years till I got my GI loan, and we bought a house on South Vine. And according to the record, we moved here in 1949. So we've been here, what, 60 years?
You left out the part about the petition. Okay,
Well,
that's-
I think the family would like to know. And I think the older members of the family understand that at one point in time, I think when you were over on Franklin Street,
Yeah.
that there was a petition. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, well, like everything else, if you're in a wrong nationality, you're not welcome. So the people on our street started a petition to get us out of here. But there were several people in Van Wert that I was a veteran,
Hazel Gleason was one of them.
and there was a lady that liked my wife very, very much, and her name was Hazel Gleason. And through her, she, I would say, backed us up. And we lived here ever since. Van Wert was a pretty hard place to be welcome. I'll guarantee you that.
It still is.
There's places in Van Wert at my time that you couldn't even get a drink of water. But now, they are welcome our family because it's a Linus family. In the first place, I had 4 years in the Navy, 6 years in the National Guard, and 30 years in the police force in Van Wert. I was trying to show them that we were good citizens. And that's it.
Dad, you mentioned your time in the police force, and I know recently the local newspaper ran an article, and you were mentioned and interviewed in that. How did you get started on the police force?
Well, that was Chief Kennedy's idea. Let's see, that was way back in 40. Let me think a little bit.
Take your time.
That was back in 48. There was a lot of migrants in the state of in Van Wert County. Instead of them trying to get themselves out of trouble, they would say something and they would get themselves into trouble. And the chief asked me if I would join their services as an interpreter, and plus being a reserve in the police force. So I joined up, and I got sworn in by Judge Harrington and Judge Fortney and Judge McNeil, and even now I'm sworn in by Judge Steele and Judge Campbell as an interpreter. And I had I had 30 years in a police force. But nowadays, you got to be certified in being a Spanish interpreter. So hey, that's all right. My son David's doing that now.
How about the Navy? You did some time during World War II?
Oh yeah. When I went into the Navy, the first place we went, went to Great Lakes Naval Training, and from there they shipped me out to San Francisco, which is a little place called Stockton, which was called Fleet City, and from there we embarked on a transport. We spent 14 days and 14 nights zigzagging all over Pacific. We went south of Hawaii, and we almost hit New Zealand, and then we went to the islands of Caledonia. From Caledonia we waited for the fleet, and I got there just in time to go to the invasion of, well, we went all over the places. There wasn't an island that we didn't hit. The USS Massachusetts was a battle wagon, and we would always cover the landings of the Marines, the Army, and the Air Force. So we went to Saipan. Well, the first place we went to Saipan, and from there we went into Leyte. From Leyte, we stayed there and waited for the Japanese to come through, and we chased the Japanese fleet from Leyte back to Tokyo, and from there on we had to cover the invasion of Okinawa, which we paid hell for it.
You remember Bougainville?
Yeah, I went there.
You went ashore.
You okay
Yeah.
with talking about that?
I went to, I landed in Bogusville with the amphibs, and that was a really something.
That's where
I'm
you
glad
ran
we
into
only
the,
spent, I only got, glad that I only spent 4 days, and then they took me back.
That's where you ran into the Japanese Imperial Marines.
Yeah.
Okay. Dad, you know, before the war you had met and married Mom. Can you give us any, since Mom is no longer with us, can you give us some information on her side of the family and about her parents and how they came here?
My wife's parents did the same thing as my parents. They were fugitives from the revolution, and her parents was in Texas, Paris, Texas. That's where she was born, and her father was more like a merchant. They make with hot tamales and everything, and he would sell them off the cart. But they had a cousin that was living in Gary, and he was telling how all the money was being made in Gary, and they moved up here to Gary, Indiana, and they went to work for the steel mills. And then somebody else told them about Ohio, how the work was, and so they moved to Ohio here in Hoagland, Jackson, and that's how I met my wife, Tonya.
Now, her father's name was Vargas. What do you remember Grandma's name on Mom's side?
Her father was named John Vargas, and her mother was named Graviela. Maiden name was Puentes, but she became Graviela Vargas.
Now, how did you meet Mom?
I met her at school. We were students there, and she was part secretary to the principal, but she was a very smart lady. That's about it.
Remember the time you put the ball through the window?
Oh. One time I was playing baseball, way out in the field, and I happened to hit the ball pretty doggone hard, and the darn thing flew on top of the gymnasium, and it went right through the window where she was studying. So I paid for the window, $1.40.
Dad, when your family was moving around, I mean, even before you met Mom and had all of us, what was your life like? I mean, you know, for the younger kids in the family that, you know, might not know where we came from. We've got some pictures, and I'm going to hopefully work them into this, that of our grandparents working in the beet fields. What was life like for you guys back then?
Well, at that time they didn't have no laws about child working. I was working in the fields with my dad when I was 12 years old. I drove my first car when I was 14 years old. Didn't have to license. I just get in and drive. That's what I learned how to drive tractors. I learned how to drive a team of horses, and my dad didn't know how to speak English, so I was the interpreter. Every time he wanted to go get the groceries, the clerk knew him, the store owner knew him, and he would go back in the counter and pick out what he wanted, and then they billed us for it. That's the way it was. My mother never went to the store.
Who were the farmers who hired us? Like Faust? There's a lot of people who helped this family. There's a lot of good people in Van Wert County.
Oh yeah. After they began to know us here, we had a lot of people helping us. We had the farmers. We had Pangles. We had McClure's,
Faust,
and they helped us a lot.
Dad, Mom told me once about how you and her were working in the field, and you saw her sweating and hot from picking, and you threw your hoe away and walked into town.
After we got married, we were still working in the fields, blocking beets, picking tomatoes. And one time I was blocking beets, and I happened to turn around, and I seen my wife. She was already pregnant with Manuel, and I seen the sweat coming out of her eyebrows, and I said, "To hell with it." I threw the whole down, went home, packed my suitcase, and I told, that time we was living with her mother, and I told her to stay here with her mom and dad, or I'll go look for a job. And I picked up the bus and went to Lima, and I started working at the highest steel in Lima. And that's how we started to, we just quit the fields. That's how we quit following the harvest. And we began to settle down. And then at that time, I had to go to the war. I had Manuel as a little boy, and I had David. She was pregnant for David. I didn't have to go, but I went anyway because I've kept reading where they were killing their boys and cutting their heads off, and I says, I'd rather fight them over there than here. And that's how I got in the Navy. What else?
Our families, your side of the family and mom's side of the family, we've got some sketchy information on where we came from in Mexico. Do you, like I know you talked about your dad's hometown.
My wife's family came from the state of Durango, and my father and mother, they came from the city of Acapulco, and that was part of Mexico City, just on the outskirts of Mexico City. But as I know now, it's just like Chicago. It swallowed up all the little cities around this city, and Mexico swallowed up this little town. There's no Acapulco anymore.
How did your dad and your mom come across?
They came across the bridge by paying a nickel. And that was it. They opened the bridges because they knew that they were refugees from the revolution, and they just walked across. That was it.
Dad, your sisters, where are they now?
Well, my stepsister has passed away, and she's out here in Woodland Cemetery. And my other sister, Salsa Gonzalez, she's in Paulding, Ohio. She's doing pretty good. She's about, 50, she's 60. Wait a minute, I'm 81 and she's 3 years younger, so she what, 78?
Mm-hmm.
About 78. But she's living very good. Her kids are taking care of her very well.
During the war, you ran a 40 millimeter pom pom?
I was during the war, I was a 20 millimeter man, and when we was going to land in Tokyo, before the bomb dropped, I was carrying a carbine.
So you were going ashore?
Yeah. But since the bomb dropped, that's what saved my life. We didn't have to go. They called us all back. They took the guns back. They took everything back, and we were sailors again.
Yeah. But running a 20, you were through the kamikaze attack, weren't you?
Oh, that's right. When we went to Okinawa, the kamikazes, we was very, very lucky that we didn't get hit. The only time we got hit is when we was in Leyte. That's why when we had to come back to the United States because one of the screws got damaged. And then we had to go back to Okinawa, and it was heck with the kamikazes. I seen I think it was a Franklin that got hit, and there was 3 other ones that got hit. But when we was in Leyte, going to Leyte, I seen the Princeton go down, and that was between Saipan and Leyte. She took a torpedo, and I seen her go down. But when the Franklin got hit and those other carriers got hit, the boys were jumping overside, and it just, you could see their little heads bobbing out all over the ocean.
Dad, how long were you in the Navy again?
4 years.
4 years. Okay.
When did you start working at the Continental Can Company?
When I came back to the United States after I got discharged, you couldn't buy a car. I went back to get my job, and instead of going back to the foundry, I was working for the locomotive. And after I worked the locomotive for about 2 years, you couldn't buy a car. If a car broke down, and you couldn't buy a car for Sikkim. So I quit that over there, and I phoned my boss over there in Lima to tell him to give everything away in the locker that I had. And there's a man, Mr. Wise, where we used to get our groceries in Ohio City, and he told me, he says, Louis, why don't you go over to Connell Canyon Van Wert? My son-in-law is a personnel manager. So I came over here to Van Wert, and I talked to the manager, and the manager says, well, when do you want to work? Yeah, I says, well, anytime. I said, I'll go to work now. So right away, they just put me back there, and I went to work. That was in 47. Yeah, 47. And I worked for Connell Cat for 37 years.
How long were you a shop steward?
Let's see. I was chief shop steward on a night trick for, let's see, well, 20 years, till the time I got sick, and I took care of all the people at nighttime, and if I ever got in trouble, all I had to do is call the union, and they would come in and help me.
Well, Dad, I think we're just about done. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? I mean, you know, we have been kind of spread out over the years, but anything you want to say to the family?
Well, I'm pretty proud of my family. Proud of my, well, right now, let's see, I got 14 grandchildren. Now I got 20 great-great-grandchildren. So, hey, I can nothing complain.
Thanks, Dad.
Okay.